Welcome back to the World with Randall Williams, and today we are going to be discussing the Stephen A. Smith and LeBron James confrontation that occurred on Thursday and kind of the fallout of it all. For those of you who don't know, the backstory is Stephen A. Smith was on First Take. He basically pleaded with LeBron to stop putting Bronny in positions where, he was essentially getting embarrassed. The specific game was when the Lakers were playing the 76ers, and Bronny had come up from the G League, and Tyrese Maxey was getting off on Bronny. He was scoring a bunch of points. They pulled Bronny, and then I think someone from the Lakers organization said, I think it was JJ Redick, who said that they didn't put Bronny necessarily in the best position to succeed. And I think Stephen A. was definitely he pleaded very heavily. And then this past game versus the Lakers and the Knicks, Stephen A. was sitting courtside with Ari Manuel, who's the CEO of TKO, of which is the parent company of the agency that represents Stephen A. And LeBron James confronted him. He told him to stop fucking with his son repeatedly. Stephen A. said a bunch of different things about this. It made him feel sad at first, and then Legends, um, a really a media account that I think is pretty fun out there on X and on Instagram, put out a video where it shows LeBron James having a conversation with Richard Jefferson, and the dialogue, I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically says, the moment you mention you as a father, I can't. And that caused Stephen A to change tune a little bit, because he originally said that was LeBron James, the father, coming to talk to him. And he felt like at first LeBron was talking to him about, the critiques that Stephen A may have made on Bronny. But then Stephen A has since said, he's realized that it was about him. And he's been pretty furious about things, and saying some of the players who won't speak with him anymore. And overall, I think this is a lesson on both sides in media accountability. Like, what you say on both sides as a player and as a journalist has power. And like, I'm not speaking for Stephen A, because I've spoken to Stephen A handful of times. I've interviewed him either 2 or 3 times, definitely twice. Um, there's a possibility of a third as well. But point being, Stephen A understands media accountability better than anybody. He's been in the industry a long time, and LeBron does too. But I think that one of the things that gets lost in the new age of media, where everybody can and say anything, anybody can say anything, that what you say has consequences. Like, we don't really see that necessarily play out a lot of times. I think that people just get off hot takes and say the most outrageous thing, it goes viral, and then social accounts run with it, and it just becomes meme. It becomes meme worthy. And that isn't always the healthiest form of journalism. It isn't the most authentic form of journalism. And Stephen A comes from the 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 journalism roots, like writing in newspapers and things like that. And I think LeBron's media literacy is better than most players. He is one of the best at understanding his voice has power. He's not going to say anything that he doesn't want to. He doesn't allow anybody to speak for him when he has feeling on a topic. And I've spoken to people around LeBron, never to LeBron directly, but I think this is a good media accountability 101. And as I've listened to Stephen A talk about this, one of the things that has come up is that, you know, that LeBron set this up, that he set up Bronny to be criticized the way that he is by propping things up and saying on the shop, where he goes out and says, like, I want to play with Bronny. That's my number one goal. And then he talks about how, on the shop, where he says, Bronny is, he said that, Bronny's better than some of the guys in the NBA. I believe that was a tweet. And then on the shop, he says, like, where Bronny said he wants to make a name for himself. And there was a lot of conversation around this, whether LeBron said something or not. I think it would have been a subject of discussion, because LeBron is, one of the two most famous basketball players ever, one of the most famous athletes ever. And his son having the opportunity to play in the NBA, to be alongside his father in LeBron, was always going to be a spectacle. And for LeBron to come out and say, I want to play with my son, I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that from the media perspective, it it builds the wall up even taller for Bronny to get over. And obviously Bronny had the tragic heart incident where he was set back a little bit. And you know, it really definitely set off his training a bit. And I'd say the college numbers weren't exactly what we thought they'd be, and it was definitely a surprise to me that he was going to go into the NBA draft. I thought that he would have done another year to develop in college, but at the same time, I fully understand if you're LeBron or whoever is planning things, why you would want Bronny to play for the Lakers, because he's alongside his father, and what better way for LeBron to develop and gain experience than right next to his dad, who's one of the greatest players of all time. And for Stephen A, like I want to, I respect the fact that Stephen A has come out and said like he hasn't always spoken on things. He didn't show up at Sierra Canyon, he didn't show up at USC because he knows the spectacle that it would have created. Where if Stephen A shows up at these games, there's going to be people who expect him to talk about this, and that's true. And he has the power to speak about whatever he wants at ESPN. He has said dozens of times, like, First Take is the number one show on morning television, 13 years in running. He's an executive producer. He picks who comes on First Take. And with that in mind, he didn't speak about the subject as much as he could have. Like there's a lot of conversations on ratings and why the NBA isn't covered the way that maybe the NFL is in terms of market size. And Stephen A said, like, when you don't talk about the big market teams or the big names, the ratings dip. And there's some truth in that, and I think that both the NBA and its media partners could do a better job of building things up. And with that in mind, I think there's something between LeBron and Stephen A that they have never seen eye to eye. It's clear as day. Even before I became a journalist, they just never got along. It was never got along. And Stephen A's had his run-ins with players for years. Like, this isn't a first-time thing. If you followed him, if you followed some of the stories he's told, he's always had run-ins with players. And I think run-ins with players and with the people that you're covering as journalists is natural. You are going to write stories that are going to piss people off. And people are going to come up to you and or call you or text you or just confront you about things that they may not like and they may not think is fair. And it's your job as a journalist to stand your ground. And in that moment on courtside, I think there was a miscommunication between Stephen. There was, I wouldn't say a miscommunication, but I think there were some things lost in translations from what LeBron was saying to Stephen A. and the feelings behind it, just because the moment was so intense. Who knows how it would have been if Stephen A would have said something, but it's playing out the way that it's playing out. And I think that there are times that I wish that LeBron would have just let Bronny be. And I don't think he necessarily exerted himself to the level that maybe LeVar Ball did years ago. But it's LeBron James, and we pay attention to literally everything that he does. If he, posts on Instagram or does something, or he's playing Madden against somebody, like, they make a post about it on ESPN. He is the biggest athlete in the world, one of the most famous athletes in the world, and he's magnetic. So the magnifying glass is larger than most athletes, fortunately or unfortunately. And I think he knows what comes with that. At the same time, I do think that from Stephen A's side of things, I think that he critiques LeBron. He and Skip Bayless critique LeBron more heavily than anybody. And they don't keep the same energy for Jordan ever. Like, we don't talk about Michael Jordan's pitfalls. We don't talk about his Wizards career. We don't talk about the competition that they're playing against. We don't talk about the super teams or anything. And that's with respect to the players of the past and with respect to the players of the future. The NBA game has come a long way from the 90s. We often talk about the 90s as the golden era of players, and there are a lot of really, really good players in the 90s. There's a lot of really good players today. At the same time, with that in mind, like, Michael Jordan has in a flawless resume, 5 MVPs, 6 rings, 6 Finals MVPs, like I want to say it's 10 or 11 scoring titles. Like he has records that just no one, records or accomplishments that no one will touch. At the same time, so does LeBron. But when we bring up LeBron's accomplishments, we only bring them up in the shadow of Michael Jordan. And so with that, like he's just scored 50,000 points. And the first thing that happens is we go on these big media networks, and all that is discussed is like, oh, is he the greatest all time? And Stephen A is the one with the loudest microphone. He's the one who's been in front of the television screen the longest. And so when you are the person who's always talking about this, you're the person who's bringing people on, you're the person who's on TV the most consistent, and you're always saying you're number two, you're number two, you're number two, but you're not necessarily talking about the way that Michael Jordan may have had pitfalls, or we don't talk about him keeping Isaiah Thomas off of the 1992 Olympics team. We don't talk about, the we don't talk about where Michael Jordan could have been better. We just don't. It goes it just isn't spoken about. And I don't think that that's necessarily fair because we're often using the past to tear down players. And that's not maybe how we use the past should be a measuring sticks. And I don't necessarily feel like that's the case in the NBA right now. There's only one player who I feel like we appreciate in real time, and that's Steph Curry. Like we don't necessarily critique Steph Curry the same way. And I think it's in large part because we've never seen anything like him. He's a first of its kind. And I think LeBron is too, and he's a one of a kind as well. But like the measuring stick with LeBron is so jacked up. He scored 50,000 points. He's become the all-time leading scorer. You know, his stats I think will never be touched ever. And yet all we do is compare him to Michael Jordan. And I think they are, whether you have Michael Jordan as the greatest or LeBron as the greatest, I think both of them have a stake at the claim, have a claim at the stake. And it doesn't always feel like that is the message on ESPN. Now, since Shannon Sharp has been there, Shannon Sharp does a better job of speaking on LeBron's behalf, but at the same time, Shannon Sharp is not a journalist. I think he majored in journalism. He works in media, but he's more of an analyst. And I think Stephen A is a journalist turned commentator, turned analyst, turned media executive. Like he's a bunch of things, but he's rooted in journalism. And Shannon Sharp was a football player and then got into media a little later. And from the journalist perspective, I think that journalists have the responsibility of storytelling and crafting or shape journalists shape narrative sometimes, especially on TV. And the narrative with LeBron early on in his career was that he came up short and all of these different things, which is true. Like he definitely did not play his best against the Mavericks, and there are moments where he could have been better. Michael Jordan had the exact same thing early on in his career. Now, it wasn't on the brightest stage. Like Michael Jordan always played well in the finals for the most part. And LeBron in the Mavericks finals, he didn't. But we don't appreciate like his '04, I believe that's '04-'05 title run where he ends up getting swept by the Spurs. But at 22 to take a team to the finals, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about the, what is it, nine straight finals appearances. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about the 2018 season, which is, I think, if someone were to ask me the greatest player I ever saw play, would be LeBron in the 2017-2018 season. We just don't speak about it. And in large part because there's also other greatness as well, but we don't talk about Larry Bird. We don't talk about Magic Johnson. It's just Jordan. It's just Jordan. And Stephen A has a better relationship with Michael Jordan than he does with LeBron James. And I think that's clear as day too, because when we started having a conversation about Steph Curry being the greatest player of all time, like Michael Jordan texted Stephen A and said Magic Johnson, and they have their back that way. But with that in mind, and Stephen A's work to build up these relationships and things like that, I think that there maybe it's a relationship thing. And I think he believes the things that he says as well, but it doesn't ever feel like the players of today can necessarily win him over. Like there's always like, oh yeah, you good, but you ain't him. And I don't think that's healthy. Like to in media to that's how ring culture got started. Like, yeah, you had a great year, but you ain't win no ring. You scored, you averaged 33. But what does it mean? You fell short in the playoffs. And there are some players who definitely deserve that criticism. LeBron isn't one of them. Like he's 10 finals appearances, 4 rings, 4 MVPs, and some of which he was robbed of. Like we don't talk about media accountability in voting. Now we do in the NFL. We talk about that a lot in when the MVP race is happening. And we talk about maybe here and there in the NBA, but in regards to players getting awards that they deserve, don't think so. Because the only time we're talking about it is when it comes time for to vote for first team all NBA or all team defense and things like that when contracts and money are involved. But outside of that, in the awards, people are like, oh, LeBron got his awards, and that like there's an argument that like LeBron should have 6 MVPs right now, or 7 or 5, or whatever the number is. But there's voter fatigue. Oh yeah, we've seen LeBron do that before. He's just being LeBron. But like that's underappreciating greatness. And I think that there is an underappreciation for LeBron because he's done it for so long, because we've seen him for over 2 decades. And Jordan's career was 14 years, not including the Wizards. And that was that. Like he reached higher heights than anybody before, but we've never seen anybody at the top as long as LeBron. And I don't know that Stephen A, when he listens to himself, I wonder what he thinks when he hears himself talk about this, because what it sounds like is like, yeah, LeBron is great. He's good, but he ain't him. And I don't think that in every single conversation about NBA feats, we need to bring up the feats of the past unless someone is being surpassed. Like that's the thing. Like when we talk about Steph Curry, who's going to hit 4,000 threes and could very well hit 5,000 threes before the end of his career, of course, like we want to honor that, but we don't talk about, yeah, but like Ray Allen or whoever else. And I don't think that's an apples to apples comparison, because Steph Curry, shot off the dribble way more than Ray Allen, and they're two completely different players. But point is, like, we don't always compare an accomplishment to an accomplishment. Sometimes we just need to appreciate the moment. If we don't appreciate the moment, then like it creates the toxic culture that I think basketball media is stuck in right now, which is that no one can appreciate anything. Like we just the season is so long, there's so much drama that occurs throughout the season that when a player improves, it's like, yeah, you did it, but you didn't do this, and it's just not healthy. It's just not healthy. Um, One of the other things that I would ask between LeBron and Stephen A is like, when did this get personal? It's very clearly personal, and maybe it got personal with LeBron when he started talking about Bronny. I think that's probably the point. But for Stephen A, I wonder when they didn't vibe. Why they didn't vibe? Is it because of he felt like there was some unfairness and um the reporting wasn't there? Like I just wonder for between the two of them where things went left. I don't know if we'll ever have that explanation. I don't necessarily think we will unless he sits down in front of a journalist, he being Stephen A, sits down in front of a journalist and asks, and he may not even say it then. Anyways, I'm going down the rabbit hole here. I'm interested to know what you all think of the LeBron James and Stephen A confrontation and how things have gone and where you all stand on media accountability. I think that there's a lot to learn from this. I think I'm interested to see where things go from here. I don't think LeBron touches this any more than I think he'll be asked about it. I think he declined to comment. Um, but that's my stance. I think that it's good lessons. I think that Stephen A could appreciate LeBron a little bit more without comparing him directly to Michael Jordan at every chance he gets. And I think LeBron uh, could have communicated his love for Bronny differently, and maybe and communicated his love for Bronny differently. What I mean by that is by not necessarily propping him up and saying he was better than NBA players who are currently playing. Um, that's my thoughts. Those are my thoughts. Uh, but let me know what you all think. As always, I appreciate every like, comment, and subscription. I'll be back here on Thursday with Invincible stuff, season finale. I'll talk to you all soon. And this is The World with Randall Williams. You all be easy.